What's up, Keller Williams Realty Partners, coming to you with another educational video. Again, this is video 3 in the video series about new construction. I'll start right where I left off on the first question. Again, this is asking the new on-site agent, can you tell us about the final walkthrough and new home orientation process and the timeline on the certificate of occupancy? Let me start with the last part of that first. The certificate of occupancy is usually issued right before we close. Sometimes it's a couple weeks before, it just depends. Usually that was a big problem during the COVID and a couple years after that, because they were having a hard time getting people out to issue that, people getting permits and so on. The certificate of occupancy these days hasn't really been much of an issue. The first part is the final walkthrough portion. Usually what will happen is, if you're starting it literally from the ground up, it depends on where you are in the process. Maybe the home is partially built and you can circumvent some of this, but if you're starting from the ground up, they'll usually call you out for a foundation meeting. I believe that's what they call it. It's before they start actually putting wood up and start building. You have the right as the buyer to inspect that. A lot of people skip that. Look, it depends on how you look at it. The counties and the people responsible for issuing permits today are doing a much better job than they did 20 and 30 years ago about doing this stuff. So, there's no limit, just like with a resale, there's no limit to the amount of money you can spend on inspections. The buyer is certainly welcome to go out there and have someone inspect the foundation or slab, whatever the case may be. Then usually they'll do a walkthrough for pre-drywall. They'll walk you through the property and you can inspect it there too. But you want to get an idea of what the orientation process is. And generally what happens too is once they get the home built, about a week before the closing date, they'll have you come out as the buyer and they'll walk you through the property. And you should be there as the agent to walk through. This is usually when they put blue tape on the wall to find any deficiencies or anything like this in the paint. But also you need to walk through with a keen eye and make sure you're pointing things out to the buyer that they may have missed. Sometimes the tile's wrong, sometimes the shower's wrong. And by this point, you will have wanted to have an actual inspection. You definitely want to have at least an overall inspection, a general inspection of the property. Some people choose to forego that and sometimes they regret it. Sometimes they don't, sometimes it works out just fine. My suggestion is to always get an inspection. You need an inspection on a new construction property just as much as you do on a resale. We had one done on a new construction property that was about 95% done, and the inspection was so bad that we decided to terminate. We didn't even ask them to fix anything. It was so bad. So it's something you should probably consider, probably something you can't force your buyer to do anything, but you can strongly suggest. Next, can you tell the buyers your policy on sod, plants, and bushes? The reason why I always ask this question is because I want them to hear it from the source that those things typically are not covered. If all the bushes die or the tree dies out front or the sod dies or whatever reason, they're not going to be held responsible for that after the fact, or at least very rarely they are. And it's almost certainty that they're not going to take any responsibility for it in the contract. Next, is there anything like refrigerators, blinds, window screens, bathroom mirrors, towel racks that don't come with a property? Generally, you're going to know about the refrigerator, but sometimes people are blindsided. I remember one of the first ones I did, they were pretty surprised that there weren't any bathroom toilet paper racks or blinds or window screens at all. And I was kind of back on my heels about this because I really didn't know. You want to ask these questions up front to try to get an idea if there's anything typical that comes with a house that doesn't go with this new construction property. Next, is there any wiggle room on the price? Sometimes you can negotiate the price and sometimes you can't. It's just a matter of how desperate they may be in this market. You might be able to do that. They're typically wanting to give incentives or closing costs instead of a price reduction. But again, anything is up for negotiation. If they're up against a deadline, you may or may not know that, but you can sometimes wiggle on the price. It just depends. Is there a due diligence period? As you know, for a resale, there's usually a 7 to 14 day due diligence period in your resale contracts. There is almost never a due diligence period during new construction, and your buyer needs to know that. And finally, is there a cutoff date for change orders? What a change order is something like, let's say you decided to go with the dark wood cabinets as opposed to the white cabinets, or you decided on this color carpet as opposed to that one, or maybe even you decided, there are elevations that you can choose from sometimes depending on the price range. Maybe you want to switch from one to the other, and sometimes it's going to depend on the actual change. But even if they're at the point where they're putting drywall up, you would think, well, I can just change the color carpet or the color of the carpet anytime I want to, or I can change the cabinets anytime I want to. That's not always the case. Sometimes they have a definitive cutoff for change orders of, I don't know, let's say it's 10 days prior to drywall going in. Now maybe you think that might be unfair or whatever, but they have to order this stuff ahead of time. And usually what happens is when you go under contract, there'll be a different day where you and the buyer will go to a sales office and you will pick out your different finishes, different type tiles you want, cabinets, flooring, paint, so on and so on. They have to order that stuff ahead of time. So there usually is, like I say, a definitive cutoff for change orders. And they need to be aware of that. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.